to start with a story. And the story is quite a heartfelt story. And I thought, oh, can I start with a heartfelt story? Is that too much? And I thought, well, I come from the world of opera, so if I can't start with a big emotion, you know, who can? 2 years ago, I sent 28 Valentine's Day cards. Not because I have a particularly dynamic personal life, but because I was feeling very sad and very angry about Brexit, and I was feeling a deep connection to our European neighbours, and I wanted to reach out and tell people in our fellow 27 European countries that there were really hundreds of thousands of people in Britain feeling a connection and a deep respect to our neighbours. And so what I did, I sat down at my kitchen table, you can see in the small photo, and I made 28 cards, 27, one for each country, one for the Council of Europe, and I sent them to each monarch or president of the European Union. I had some really lovely replies, actually, which was a nice surprise. And the reason I tell you that is because I believe very, very strongly in Europe, and I believe very strongly in international collaboration. So it is a particular pleasure to be here with international colleagues. I learned such a lot yesterday, listening to you and speaking with you, and it's a real honour to be here, so thank you for inviting me. I want to take you on a little tour of Birmingham this morning. As Bernard said, I'm General Manager of Birmingham Opera Company. I've been there for 3 years. Has anyone ever been to Birmingham? Amazing! It's not a very commonly visited place, so this is nice to see. I'm going to talk a lot about Birmingham Opera Company this morning because I think it's a reasonably interesting example of working with audiences. But here's a disclaimer, it's not the only way to work with audiences. Certainly, it's not necessarily the best way. It might not suit the work that you're doing. But I hope there's something in what I say that sparks an idea, or something that you think, oh, I could steal that and work with that, or maybe gets you thinking. What I want to say, it's in 4 parts. I'll do a brief introduction to the city of Birmingham. I will tell you something about the history of Birmingham Opera Company, because that's heavily intertwined with thinking about audiences. Then I'll tell you about Birmingham Opera Company in its current state, the way that we work today. And finally, I want to finish with some comments about cultural rights and an invitation to you. So, let's get going. Oh, the formatting on my slide is a bit odd. Sorry about that. This graph shows the population of England as compared with the population of Birmingham specifically. And take a look at the left-hand side. The population of England under 25 years old is about 31%. In Birmingham, it's nearly 38%. So it is a very young city, very young indeed. Yes, I think the youngest city, certainly in England, and one of the youngest in Europe. It's also incredibly ethnically diverse. Nearly 27, oh, I'm sorry, I'm missing some formatting again here. But nearly 27% of the population in Birmingham is Asian or Asian British, 9% is Black British. So it's a very rich mix of cultures and traditions and languages and cuisines. Very vibrant place to work, it can cause tensions, but an interesting city to work in. On average in England, 8.3% of the population has no qualifications or no formal qualifications whatsoever. In Birmingham, it's nearly double that. This is the region we're based in. It's called the West Midlands, and Birmingham is here. And I want to tell you briefly about something called the Index of Multiple Deprivation. It's an index that divides the country into 317 areas and ranks them according to factors like income, employment, health. And that's what the map looks like according to the index. So number 1 is the most deprived area, and number 317 is the least deprived area. And in that scale of 317, Birmingham is number 7. So we know from government data collected about audiences in England that the typical audience for publicly subsidized culture is older, white, wealthy, and highly qualified. We know that from government data, from numerous studies. Birmingham is very young. It's very ethnically diverse. Doesn't have a lot of formal qualifications, and has real poverty. So it's really not the kind of place you would think to set up an opera company. Really, it would probably, not come top of the list if you were to think where you were going to find opera audiences. And yet, that's exactly what Graham Vick did. Graham Vick, as Bernard said, was a very well-regarded stage director. He was directing operas at La Scala, the Metropolitan Opera in New York, in Salzburg, all over Italy, Bucharest, Athens. Very busy international career. And always very concerned with the question of audiences. And he founded a company in 1987, the predecessor to Birmingham Opera Company. And here's where I'm going to go a little bit into the history. The predecessor to Birmingham Opera Company was City of Birmingham Touring Opera. And the model for that was to take opera outside designated cultural spaces. So Graham wanted to take opera into shopping centres, leisure centres being venues run usually by the city or the local government, where people go to keep fit, relax, typically have swimming pools, badminton courts, sports halls. And in order to do that, Graham had the idea that City of Birmingham Touring Opera would commission reorchestrations of some of the classic operas. So he commissioned the British composer Jonathan Dove, did most of them for the company, and recreated these opera titles for between 15 and 18 orchestral musicians and around 12 singers, depending on the title. And they went out to the suburbs. You see Stockland Green Leisure Centre, Colmers Farm Leisure Centre. And this was the model of the company for a good 13 years. And actually, at the time, they were created for Birmingham, and there was no thought that they would go on to have a longer life. Actually, many companies still hire these arrangements. They're very well regarded. In the last couple of years, they've been performed by the Deutsche Oper Berlin, La Monnaie des Mondes, in America, in Virginia, in California. They still have a life outside Birmingham. And alongside things like La Bohème and the Ring Cycle, which Graham Vick and Jonathan Dove recreated as something called the Ring Saga, and took it down to 10 hours of music in total. That could be performed as the 4 titles or over 2 nights. There were productions like Ganashyam by sitarist Ravi Shankar, less known work like Rameau's Les Boréades. And it was really well received, really well received. Even the prickliest of the British critics couldn't deny that this worked. So, for example, Rupert Christensen in The Spectator said in 1991, "Some of the mightiest sounds ever imagined by the mind of man, or woman, communicate every bit as awesomely as they might in Bayreuth or Covent Garden. It is a miracle." Hilary Finch in The Times called them masterpieces of recreation. And the audiences were coming. The audiences were really coming to see this work. But Graham wasn't satisfied, because the people coming to see these works in the leisure centre or the shopping centre didn't look like the people of Birmingham. They weren't the people of Birmingham, not fully represented. They were the people who were going to the opera or to classical music concerts, also in other settings. And so at that point, we could have continued and said, oh, well, the critics like it, the audiences are coming, let's just carry on. But that's not what happened. That's when Birmingham Opera Company was founded. And Graham really felt that if it was going to be Birmingham's opera company, then the audience had to be a really broad cross-section of all of the people who live and work in Birmingham. And the question was how to engage them, how to understand and build a relationship with them. And this is where the Birmingham Opera Company model comes into play. So, the decision was made that for every production that Birmingham Opera Company did, there would be an open invitation to the people of Birmingham to sing, dance, or act in productions alongside professional artists. So we work often with the City of Birmingham Symphony Orchestra, not always, but often. We have fully professional creative teams, international soloists, and then this gang of a couple of hundred people from Birmingham who come on board to be in the chorus or to volunteer as actors as part of the production. And I will show you a clip of what this looks and sounds like in a moment. It was summarized nicely last year in an article written by Alexandra Kochlan in the iNews. She wrote this as a review of Lady Macbeth of Mtsensk when we did the online streaming. She said, "This isn't opera for the community, it's opera from the community. The difference is everything, a model for opera making that will only become more urgent." And this is large-scale work. So we've moved on from the days of those reimagined orchestrations, and this is large-scale work. This was our last production, Wagner's Rheingold. I think the orchestra in the end was 89 players. So it's huge work, ambitious work. Where does it take place? Well, as Bernard said, I have worked for a few opera companies. Birmingham Opera Company is my fourth. So I'm going to show you a picture of all of the companies that I've worked for, their venues, and see if you can spot the difference between Birmingham Opera Company and the others I've worked for. So you have the London Coliseum, English National Opera, top left. Top right, Covent Garden. Bottom left, Göteborgsoperan in Sweden. And then bottom right, the Sherborne Rubber Factory in Birmingham. And that's what it looked like before we started work on Idomeneo in 2008. So Birmingham Opera Company takes over abandoned warehouses, factories, an abandoned ice rink once, an aircraft hangar, a nightclub, circus tent. These are the kind of venues that we perform in. Non-theatre spaces. And the logic is, the initial logic was, we want to be close to where the audiences are. So we will find a factory, buy a housing estate, and we will ask the people who live there to come. And over the years, it's very interesting. I found theatre spaces can be so alienating, because either you're used to them or you're not, and you know sort of what the unwritten rules are or you don't. And actually, by putting an opera in a warehouse, absolutely no one knows what to expect. It's great. It's very democratizing. So even if it is a challenge to put on an opera in a space that sometimes has no electricity, no heating, no running water, it's also great fun and quite democratic. The other thing to note is that the audience moves with the action. We let the orchestra sit down. We're not monsters, but the audience know. So if this were a Birmingham Opera Company production, there wouldn't be any seats. And it could be the case that any one of you might actually be a performer and jump up and break into an aria at any given moment. Or that these doors might burst open and a chorus would come in and strike up. And it's an exciting way of working, and I think that there is something special about being physically close to someone doing something extraordinary. Whether that's sport or art or music or whatever, there is something about a physical proximity to someone doing something with enormous skill that's That's very electrifying. One of the downsides of this is that when I'm watching, say, a crime drama and there's someone chasing someone else through a warehouse, rather than thinking, oh, I wonder what's going to happen, I'm thinking, where would I put the orchestra? So it's changed the way I think about spaces. Okay, I'm going to show you a little bit of what Lady Macbeth of Mtsensk, which we staged in 2019, looked like. This was in a space called the Tower Ballroom. It was a nightclub by a reservoir outside the city centre that had been repossessed by the council because it was being badly run, and we managed to get our hands on it and stage an opera in there. I'll show you about 2 minutes worth of this.
Young minds are all the same. S'il vous plaît, rendez-vous sur cette provençale. Understand? She will, if anyone, yes, you must swear by the sacred icons you'll be true to your husband.
I swear!
Good. Those people are useless. What are you sniggering about? Your master has to leave you. You should be shedding tears of grief, but you do not care.
So, it's large-scale work, an open invitation to anyone who wants to be in it, no auditions, no costs, no experience necessary. If you want to be in an opera, we will take responsibility for taking you on that journey. I don't want to seem boastful, but I would like to mention that Birmingham Opera Company has won some awards, which is really nice. And what's interesting, I think, is the range of awards. So Birmingham Opera Company has been recognised for with education awards, with audience development awards, and with awards for the category of, best opera or music theatre production. And what I find interesting is that it's the same work that's winning these awards. It's not that a production is the best production and an audience programme wins that category. It's the integrated work wins this range of awards. I think it's quite interesting. So, we do a production every 1 to 2 years. It's quite an unusual model. We don't have the same turnover of productions that many theatres have. So what do we do the rest of the time? That's a question I get asked a lot. What do you do the rest of the time? Well, the entire city is our opera house, so we are very often out and about, performing in different places, meeting people, singing with them. And to illustrate that, I wanted to show you, here is where I have been in the last 10 days. I've been to a cafe bar as part of a local neighbourhood arts evening with different performers from that neighbourhood performing. We took an opera singer down. I've been to a community library on a large housing estate called Druid's Heath. I've been to visit a neighbourhood food service. They tackle food poverty, and every week they offer a hot meal to members of the community who want to come, and it's on a pay-as-you-feel basis, and there's a stage in the space where they do this, so we took a singer and a pianist down and did some performances. We have a programme called Opera While You Shop, and we've been to One Stop Shopping Centre. We have a spot outside Burger King. We've been to the Moseley Road Baths. It's an Edwardian swimming baths that's been restored. One swimming pool is still a swimming pool. The other swimming pool is empty, and you can do things in their events. We've been to a forensic psychiatric hospital and worked with women who are both detained and cared for there. We've been to Cypher Fireside. It's a drop-in centre for people who are homeless or in precarious housing situations. And then on Friday morning, before I came, I was at a women's refuge for people who've experienced modern-day slavery, so human trafficking or forced labour. And we go out and we perform for people. We talk about opera. We talk about what they think about it. We sing together often or work together. And every time we're out, we invite people onto the next thing. So there's an invitation. Oh, if you like this, would you like to do something else? There's this next thing. There's this next thing. And then eventually there's a production. Do you want to be in a production? And I don't see it as an education program as such. I mean, I imagine people learn stuff along the way. But it's really a two-way process, and I wanted to illustrate that with a quotation from a speech Graham gave in 2003, and he called the speech "Inclusion or Be Damned." And this is about the Fidelio he did in 2003. This was the third Fidelio I'd directed, but approaching the piece in collaboration with 200 people from the community of Birmingham, standing on the earth, digging a grave, talking about death, about the chains of the soul, about imprisonment, feeling how people's lives were reflected in the content of the piece, and vice versa, whether those lives were the imprisonment of looking after an aging relative, of sexuality, or of addiction, was a profoundly moving and instructive experience. So it's really about, it's artistic research. It's informing the way that the next production will be staged, as well as meeting people and building a network. Because Graham believed very passionately that you don't need to be educated. Sure, maybe your experience of opera, once you've discovered it, it might be enriched by being educated. It's not to say education is not a bad thing per se. I just want to share one more quote. You do not need to be educated to be touched, to be moved and excited by opera. You only need to experience it directly at first hand, with nothing getting in the way. It is those of us who make the work whose responsibility it is to remove the barriers and make the connections that will release its power for everybody. I love that. I love that idea of responsibility. One of my personal pet hates is the way in England arts organisations sometimes talk about groups who are hard to reach. I think they're not hard to reach, you're hard to reach. The work is hard to reach. The work is hard to reach for them. They're not hard to reach. And if we take responsibility for making our work not hard to reach, it means we can do something about it. We can be empowered. I don't think anyone's hard to reach, not really. So I have a few more comments about how Birmingham Opera Company works. I want to talk about repertoire. We choose the repertoire very carefully, repertoire that will speak to people in Birmingham. And it's not always the most obvious titles, you know. When I say I work in opera and I'm really interested in audiences and engagement and participation, people often assume that it means that I do the Magic Flute or Carmen, which, you know, they're great titles. But Birmingham Opera Company works very hard to choose titles that will resonate with the people of the city. So Rheingold was the most recent title, and I think what could be more relevant than people in power being so crazy about power, so delusional in their ambitions, that they will do anything and lose all sense of responsibility to the people around them. Or of Mother Earth warning that we cannot carry on treating the planet like this and no one listening. I mean, what could be more relevant than that? The very first title that Birmingham Opera Company did in 2000 wasn't the Magic Flute or Carmen, it was Wozzeck. And it was respelt. The company respelt it Wozzeck, so as not to spend 8 weeks telling people it's not Wozzeck or Wozzeck. We deliberately cast our singers so that the people of Birmingham will feel represented by who they see on stage. And originally I called this slide casting, and I thought actually it goes beyond that, because it's not just the people that you see on stage. We try really hard and make good progress in all of the people in the company, whether that's stage management or assistant directors or front of house staff or our accountant or whoever, and saying, okay, this is our city. We want to mean something to our city. We need to reflect our city in what we do. We work hard to develop talent, whether that's young people. We know that young people are, or we have observed from our own work, that young people tend to be less interested in choral singing than older people. It's something that doesn't automatically resonate with them in the same way. So we invest in developing their talent. This is a session we ran in a recording studio where we did a load of vocal work, and then we made a recording with them so they could take something home, share with their friends or whoever is important in their lives. And we don't have a singers program or anything like that as such, but when singers are with us, we try really that hard to invest in their development long term. So although we don't have an ensemble of resident singers, there are singers we work with over many years and who have really come on a journey with Birmingham Opera Company and who feel part of the family for sure. Our communications, one of the great things about working with loads of different people and investing in those relationships and engaging them is that they start talking about your work for you. And that's gold dust. You know, I can stand here and say, Birmingham Opera Company is great, but actually to have someone who doesn't work for Birmingham Opera Company stand there and say, Birmingham Opera Company is great, it is worth a lot more. We try and keep our, we're not corporate enough to have anything like a brand policy or anything like that. But we do try and keep our communications informal, direct, informal. And here's a really practical tip. If ever you're going to do something with public engagement where you want people to find out about your work or to come to something you're doing, get a phone, set up a phone number, set up a WhatsApp. That's how we communicate, right? We text each other, we WhatsApp. So we have a phone called the participation phone, and people can text it if they're curious or have questions. And this is a real-life text message that I got on Thursday morning. Good morning, I'd like to come along to the session at Moseley Road, Bath, but wanted to check that it's okay if I've never sung opera. And this was a lady in her, I would say, 30s, a British Asian lady who was interested in singing but had never had any contact with classical music or opera. And she came along and we had a great time, and I really hope that she performs in our next opera. Talking about other people, speaking about Birmingham Opera Company, here's a short film where you can see some different people talking about the company.
I think you should get everything you think you know about opera, because it's something completely different.
Everything is all around you, and it's a different way to interact with people. Like, you're usually on a stage and the orchestra is down there and the conductor's far away from you.
I didn't know the difference, but I couldn't tell, like, from seeing who was going to be the actual opera singers and who was just like from the community. It's made me way more confident, like way more confident.
Well, I think it is attracting a lot of people. When they get into it, they are astounded, really.
Doesn't matter how smart you are, how rich you are, you can be involved and you can say your story.
I heal when I'm here. If there was a stress, I can be a character and get that out of my system.
No two individuals in this company is the same.
We need an inner space, a blank page to write on, all of us. Opera can give you that, can take you beyond your own words as well as beyond other people's words.
Ticket prices. I deliberately left this till quite late in the presentation because it's important, but I feel like we act as if it's the most important thing, and I don't think it is. But it's a thing. All of our tickets are under £20, and the volunteer performers, we pay them up to £4.60 in cash in travel expenses for every session they attend. Because the reality of Birmingham is that for some people, to buy a bus pass for £4.60 absolutely would prevent them being able to come. So that's something we do at every session where volunteers come to engage with us. So, a little summary. Why work with audiences at all? I will canter through this. Marketing, so you sell tickets to make income, the most obvious answer of all. But equally, you might want to diversify audiences, as with the touring opera that became Birmingham Opera Company. Yes, we have audiences, but they're not the ones that we want. You might want to deepen the existing audience's knowledge or broaden their interests. So you might say, these people are interested in the traditional application of the organ, but we would like to engage them with the hyper instrument, for example. Maybe it's dictated by the cultural politics and cultural policy of where you find yourself at national or local level. It might be part of your funding requirements, or indeed an opportunity to get more funding from the state or from others. You might work with audiences as a long-term investment in artists and the workforce. I thought it was very, very interesting yesterday, the question in relation to the project with young people and whether there was any, there'd been any tracking of whether those young people had gone on to conservatoire or to take lessons or whatever. And there was a lack of data, and I've absolutely found that replicated again and again in the organisations that I've worked for, that there is very little knowledge of the effect of that, but it is a very common intention to do the work for that reason. Sometimes the work with audiences is caught up with social outcomes, whether that's in education, health, housing, criminal justice. It can be part of the artistic development of the company, as in the case of Birmingham Opera Company. I want to share one of my favourite quotes, that the meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. It's a quote by Jung, and I think, yes, how exciting. I find that very exciting. I love that I can go around the city of Birmingham and share opera with people and find completely new ideas about opera in conversation with a really broad range of people. I've also worked in settings where colleagues in arts management or musicians find that very threatening, the idea that by having contact with other people, the art form might be transformed. I've never found it anything but enriching. And then we come to the final section, which is another reason you might work with audiences, is human rights. So, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, Article 27, states that everyone has the right freely to participate in the cultural life of the community and to enjoy the arts. The International Covenant on Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, Article 15, states that the states parties to the present covenant recognise the right of everyone to take part in cultural life. And you might be thinking, Hannah, they say practically the same thing. Why have you included both of those? And the reason is that the Declaration of Human Rights is an incredibly important foundational document and indicates commitments made by states, but it's not legally binding. The International Covenant, on the other hand, the provisions set out in that are legally binding. And I checked this out. It has been ratified by all of the countries that are represented in ECHO between the early 70s and the early 90s. So all of the states of the people represented here have signed up to that as a legally binding commitment. Now, there is so much interesting material out there on cultural rights, and there's not time to go into everything. So I'm going to do the 2-minute guide to where to look next if you're at all interested in cultural rights. So, 1993, Vienna Declaration and Programme of Action. This came out of the World Conference on Human Rights, and the state parties there reaffirmed their commitment to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. In 2004, the United Cities and Local Governments started a programme for cultural governance called Agenda 21 for Culture. And it's really about sustainable development and has human rights as one of the core principles. And I thought that ECHO being based at a city level and a local level, as well as an international level, that could be something interesting to look at. There's the Fribourg Declaration, of course, which was in the press release for this symposium. Then general comment number 21. And when I first came across a general comment, that sounds very banal, until I realized that in UN speak, a general comment is an authoritative interpretation of a human rights provision. So general comment 21 is the authoritative interpretation of Article 15. And if there's one thing that you go and look up to do with cultural rights, I would recommend that you take a look at general comment number 21. It's super interesting. In 2015, the Culture 21 Actions, also an initiative of UCLG, was produced as an international framework with, and that's interesting because it has commitments and concrete actions suggested for what people can do at local level. And then the Wrocław commentaries came out of the European Capital of Culture 2016. And it's a fantastic document. It's got thematic articles, but also like an encyclopedia of culture and human rights. So you can look things up thematically, and it's super accessible. There are 3 main interrelated components of the right to participate or take part in cultural life. Participation in, access to, contribution to cultural life. This is actually found in General Comment number 21. It also appeared in the first report of Farida Shahid, a Pakistani sociologist who became the first UN Special Rapporteur in the field of cultural rights. And my sense is that we've been talking about access, or English cultural policy has been talking about access for 70 years. And whether we have made progress with that, sufficient progress with that, is something that we could debate. Participation has certainly emerged in the 2 decades that I've been working in the performing arts. Participation has emerged as a big theme. But this idea of a contribution to cultural life, I think, is really underdeveloped. And I think there's huge potential in it. So I believe in it both as a right, but also the artistic potential of it. And that brings me to my conclusion, which I've called So What, or an invitation. And you are absolutely welcome, of course, not to accept any of this invitation, but you might want to, don't know. And it's in 4 parts. The first invitation is to discover something new to you in your city. And you might have lived in your city all your life, or part of your life, but in Birmingham and in all of the jobs that I've had, I found that a lot of interesting relationships I've established, or directions that have then become really interesting paths, have come from maintaining a curiosity about the city and the people there. So please, go to a new neighbourhood, have something to eat, talk to someone at a bus stop, find a new organisation that's based there. Really interesting things happen when you do that. Have a think about your audiences. Are they the audiences you'd like to have? If the answer is yes, congratulations, brilliant, keep up the good work. If not, what else could you try? have a think about the scale of the work, where it physically takes place, who your creative collaborators are, the audience experience, partner organisations, the choice of repertoire, people, representation, talent development, communications. What could a radical rethink in any of those areas look like? And when I say a radical rethink, I don't mean that you should do a kind of City of Birmingham touring opera to Birmingham Opera Company model and just completely shut down one organisation and start a new one. A radical rethink could be doing something really small, but with a radically different intention or idea or a new relationship. And then finally, if we take as the basis for our work the right to take part in cultural life, what does that mean? How can we enact that in our work? I'm particularly interested in that last question. I've recently started a PhD, the working title of which is The Cultural Politics of Human Rights in the Opera Sector. And I'm due to finish that in 2028. So give me a call in 2028. I'll tell you what I found out. But of course, you are also very welcome to contact me before that. So here are my details. There are so many Hannah Griffiths in the world. We're very common. So I put my photographs here from LinkedIn and Facebook, so you can find me easily, hopefully, if you want to do that. Thank you. It's been a real pleasure talking to you. I'm very frustrated that I have to leave at the start of lunchtime, but look forward to spending the rest of the morning with you and indeed to being in touch if you'd like to be. Thank you.